Japan is one of the countries that is known for its adoption of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. As early as 2016, Japan became the first country in the world to adopt Bitcoin as a legitimate form of payment. And ever since then, Japan has been trying to make it easier for people to use cryptocurrency and even go as far as incorporating digital yen, which is the government's CBDC, into their ecosystem. So, given all of this, is it safe to say that Japan loves Bitcoin? Well, that is not entirely true, because while Japan does recognize Bitcoin and even has exchanges that are licensed by the FSA, or the Financial Services Agency, there are still a lot of regulations that you need to follow if you want to buy, sell, trade, or use Bitcoin in Japan. So let's get straight to the point and answer the question right away. Yes, Japan regulates Bitcoin, but are these regulations favorable towards Bitcoin? The simple answer is yes, they are. Japan is one of the most crypto-friendly countries out there. They have very clear laws about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. If anything, this makes them stand out among many other countries. But in order to understand why Japan is so crypto-friendly, we need to go back to 2009 when Bitcoin was just a couple years old. In 2009, the government of Japan realized how quickly Bitcoin and blockchain technology was developing. Because of this, instead of letting things run wild and then having to deal with a bunch of problems later, they decided to take action sooner rather than later. In fact, the Japanese government made a statement in 2009 that said virtual currencies like Bitcoin should be treated as if they were cash. This meant that if you were going to accept Bitcoin as payment, you could treat it just like you would any other currency. And if anything, this was huge news at the time because it showed that the government wasn't going to try to ban or fight against crypto. Instead, they wanted to work alongside it. But this is only half of the story. The reason why this was such big news is because around the same time, China was cracking down hard on online gambling, and this crackdown included virtual currencies like Bitcoin. So obviously, other governments were watching what happened in China and seeing if they should do the same thing or not. So Japan's pro-crypto announcement directly went against what China was doing, which immediately put Japan on the map as a Bitcoin-friendly country. And just 2 years later, Japan took things even further when they passed the infamous 2016 Act on the Regulation of Virtual Currency Exchange Businesses. This act outlined strict rules and regulations for any exchange that wanted to operate in the country. And while some might think that this is a bad thing, remember that up until now, there were no rules or regulations at all. So having an act like this gave people more trust in the system and helped further the adoption of Bitcoin in Japan. Some of the requirements for these exchanges included things like customer verification, secure storage of funds, and regular audits. These requirements are very similar to what banks and other financial institutions need to follow, so clearly, Japan wanted to bring legitimacy to crypto exchanges by putting them on the same level as traditional finance, and this is exactly what happened today. There are plenty of crypto exchanges that are regulated by the FSA or the Financial Services Agency in Japan, and since the act was passed, there haven't been any major issues with hacks or scams, which just shows that this approach worked. Now, you might be thinking that all of these regulations must mean that it is not really a free market because the government is interfering. But this isn't exactly true. Think of it more like the government is making sure that everyone can play in the market fairly. Without rules like this, larger companies could easily take advantage of smaller ones, which is something that you don't want to happen. So overall, this act was extremely positive for the development of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in Japan. It helped establish a legal framework that everyone could follow, which led to increased trust and adoption. Now, it's important to note that while Japan was establishing these regulations, other countries weren't doing much of anything. For example, in the US, there was no federal guidance on cryptocurrencies until recently. And in Europe, each country had their own approach, which often led to confusion and double taxation. So while some people might argue that regulations are bad, the reality is that they actually helped Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies develop faster than they would have otherwise. And that's exactly what happened in Japan. However, Japan didn't stop there. In 2020, the Japanese government announced plans to launch a central bank digital currency, or CBDC. While this might sound scary to some people, the truth is that it's not really anything new. In fact, almost every country in the world is working on a CBDC right now. The goal of a CBDC is to give people more options when it comes to payments and also to make it easier for the central bank to manage the money supply. So overall, it's not really anything new or particularly scary. And again, Japan is one of the few countries that has been open about their plans for a CBDC. So it's not really anything to worry about. Now, some people might argue that Japan's adoption of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies is simply a way to get more tax revenue from their citizens. And while this might be true to some extent, the reality is that it's not really the main goal. The main goal is to create a more efficient and effective financial system. And this includes cryptocurrencies. For example, the Japanese government has been working on ways to incorporate cryptocurrencies into their tax system. This will make it easier for people to pay taxes using crypto, which could encourage more people to use it. It could also bring in more tax revenue from crypto transactions. But again, this isn't the main goal. The main goal is to create a more efficient and effective financial system. Overall, Japan's approach to Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies has been much different than that of other countries. Rather than trying to ban or regulate them out of existence, Japan has taken a more measured approach. They have established clear laws and regulations for cryptocurrencies, which has helped to legitimize them in the eyes of the public. They have also been working on ways to incorporate cryptocurrencies into their financial system, which will help make it easier for people to use them. While some people might not like the regulations that are in place, they have actually been very good for the development of Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in Japan. It has helped create a more stable and trustworthy environment for everyone involved. Now, as the technology continues to evolve, Japan is likely to continue being one of the most Bitcoin-friendly countries in the world. They have shown a willingness to embrace new technologies and to work with them rather than against them. This is a much better approach than many other countries are taking, and it is likely to pay off in the long run. Thank you guys for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have a great day and see you next time.